I am Chucky, the killer dog!
What is it about Chucky that just keeps us wanting more? When you look at it from an outside perspective, not knowing the character, and take away what we know about the creepy dolls horror genre, then it's a bit of a strange decision and quite a strange character. At the end of the day, he's just a child's doll. What is it that made a doll go from a horror character to a horror comedy character to an anti-hero and sometimes even just comedy icon? In today's video, we're going to break down the history of the character of Chucky through all of the movies and the TV show and try and figure out what it is that made this doll a horror icon. Let's get into it. When Child's Play first hit theaters in 1988, Chucky was terrifying, a small, seemingly innocent doll possessed by the spirit of a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray. Unlike the masked killers we're used to, Chucky didn't rely on silence or sheer size to create fear. Instead, his persona combined with a sinister edge and a twisted sense of humor, making him both unsettling and strangely entertaining. At his core, he was driven by survival, targeting pretty much anyone who got in his way, and his relentless pursuit of young Andy Barclay instantly set him apart. But as the years went on and the trends in the horror genre changed, Chucky changed too. Over time, he went from being a relentless killer to a wisecracking anti-hero, and then to a character who was as darkly funny as he was deadly. This evolution wasn't just about keeping the franchise fresh, it was a response to changing audiences' expectations and the rise of the horror comedy genre. With Bride of Chucky, he found a pretty much new identity, one that leaned into a self-aware humor while keeping his murderous spirit intact. Now, going through each major change in the Chucky franchise, we'll explore how each stage reflects the horror trends of its time, how the character of Chucky has grown, and while this killer doll continues to captivate horror fans across generations. So let's start with the birth of a horror icon in the first Child's Play movie. So taking it back to where it all began in 1988, this first film set the stage for Chucky, both as a character and as an enduring horror icon. But what makes Chucky stand out right from the start is his unique origin story. Unlike the supernatural mystery surrounding characters like Michael Myers or Jason, we know from the outset that Chucky is really Charles Lee Ray, a deranged serial killer with a dark history who transfers his soul into a good guy doll using voodoo magic. It's pretty straightforward but a chilling premise, one that added a uniquely creepy twist to the idea of childhood innocence. The fear factor in Child's Play comes from how convincingly the film blends the terrifying with the everyday. Chucky is a doll, an innocent toy that should be harmless. The good guy dolls were designed to be the ultimate kid's companion, with their friendly expressions and catchphrases. But beneath that childlike exterior, Chucky was pure evil, and seeing him come to life made us question the safety of most everyday items. This was something that Child's Play did very well. By turning a children's toy into a vessel for horror, the film created a deep-seated fear in audiences. It was a brilliant twist that turned the concept of playthings on its head. And then there's Chucky's personality. He isn't silent or emotionless like most horror villains. Instead, he's loud, he's vulgar, and he's cunning. This wasn't just a killer doll who went on silent rampages. Chucky was very expressive, sadistic, and full of personality. And this set him apart from other villains of the time. His use of profanity, sarcasm, and quick wit added a darkly humorous edge that brought something fresh to the horror genre. In the final confrontation scene, we see Chucky's manic desperation as he tries to transfer his soul out of the doll's body and into young Andy Barclay. His fear of being trapped in the doll forever drives the tension, making Chucky both horrifying and oddly relatable in his desperation to escape. The original Child's Play also set the standard for Chucky's look and movement, using animatronics and puppetry to bring him to life. The practical effects gave Chucky an uncanny realism. He wasn't CGI, but an actual doll that moved, blinked, and even grimaced. This practical approach absolutely helped Chucky feel real, a presence that audiences could believe was actually there. While later movies would lean more into comedy, in Child's Play he was genuinely menacing, tapping into primal fears that stayed with us. Ultimately, the 1988 Child's Play did more than introduce a killer doll. It established Chucky as a character with a personality, a background, and a relentless drive that made him more than just a mere slasher. He was witty, twisted, and in a strange way, kind of likable. Now with that being said, let's look at the next stage in Chucky's evolution. After 3 films in what you would consider the horror genre, things started to shift when it came to The Bride of Chucky. This film was a true game changer, marking a shift from the straightforward scares of the earlier films to a new blend of horror and dark comedy. Under director Ronnie Yu and creator Don Mancini's direction, Bride of Chucky brought an entirely different tone to the franchise. One that leaned into the self-aware humour, campness, and a healthy dose of satire, setting the stage for Chucky's evolution as a horror comedy icon. One of the biggest changes in Bride of Chucky is the introduction of Tiffany Valentine, played by Jennifer Tilly. Tiffany is Chucky's on-again, off-again lover, and she brings a whole new dynamic to the story. Their relationship is anything but typical. It's a twisted, dysfunctional love affair that somehow manages to be both hilarious and disturbing. Tiffany's addition gave Chucky something to play off of, and their interactions brought a new side to his character. Suddenly, Chucky wasn't just a lone killer doll, he had a partner in crime, who shared his love for chaos and murder, but also brought a romantic, almost domestic side to their bloody escapades. This pairing turned the film into something of a horror-romantic comedy hybrid, and audiences absolutely loved it. What really set Bride of Chucky apart, though, was its self-awareness. The film embraced its own absurdity, adding meta-humor and winks to the audience that acknowledged how strange it was for a killer doll to be in a relationship, let alone one with such chemistry. Scenes like Chucky and Tiffany's infamous wedding night make it clear that the film just wasn't scared to embrace its weirdness. The blend of horror and humor was groundbreaking at the time, as it reflected a growing trend in horror movies to lean into campiness rather than trying to play everything so seriously. The change in tone wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was also a smart move to keep the franchise relevant. By the late 1990s, horror was evolving. The genre was shifting towards being self-aware, post-modern horror with films like Scream leading the charge. Bride of Chucky tapped into this trend perfectly, aligning itself with audiences who were looking for more humor and irony in their horror. Chucky's character was evolving from a straightforward slasher into sort of an anti-hero. A character who, despite his murderous tendencies, was charming enough to make audiences root for him in some twisted kind of way. And while Bride of Chucky was a departure from the original horror tone, it still held on to Chucky's signature traits, his sadistic humor, his violent nature, and his knack for coming up with darkly creative kills. The difference now was that his murders were often laced with jokes. In many ways, Bride of Chucky was a reinvention of the franchise. It kept Chucky fresh by embracing humor and adding layers to his character, while still honoring the essence that made him popular in the first place. Tiffany's introduction and the film's campy, self-aware tone opened new doors for Chucky, transforming him from a pure horror icon into a more complex, oddly charismatic figure. And while it might have been a risk to take the character in such a different direction, it ultimately paid off massively, giving the franchise new life and setting the stage for the horror-comedy blend that would define Chucky in the years to come. I think it's pretty safe to say that with the following installment, Seed of Chucky, the franchise took the comedic evolution even further, essentially making up a straight-up comedy movie. Released in 2004, Seed of Chucky moved away from the horror foundations of Child's Play and even the dark humor of Bride of Chucky, leaning fully into the absurdity. And in many ways, the movie tested the limits of Chucky's versatility, blending horror with heavy doses of self-referential humor and over-the-top satire. Some fans embraced it, while others found the departure from horror too extreme, making Seed of Chucky one of the more divisive entries in the series. Probably the most notable change in Seed of Chucky was the introduction of their child, Glenn, or Glenda. This character brings an unusual but intriguing new layer to Chucky's character. Glenn, who has a split personality, embodying both a shy, gentle personality in Glenn and a ruthless, violent side in Glenda. It's a fascinating addition, both highlighting and parodying Chucky and Tiffany's extreme personalities. This parenting subplot allowed the movie to explore identity, family dynamics, and even gender fluidity in a way that few horror films had done before. Through Glenn and Glenda, the movie satirizes ideas of nature versus nurture, questioning whether someone, or in this case a doll, can really escape the destiny of their bloodline. This family dynamic was a massive leap from what fans of Child's Play were used to. But it wasn't just for shock value. Don Mancini, the creator of Chucky, wanted to push the franchise into uncharted territory, adding satire to traditional horror by addressing questions of identity, morality, and even acceptance. The film uses the absurdity of Chucky and Tiffany trying to raise a child to explore themes that are surprisingly relevant in a humorous but dark way. But of course, for fans seeking a straight horror movie, Seed of Chucky felt a bit jarring and at times somewhat surreal. It's loaded with self-aware humor, at times poking fun at Hollywood, the horror genre, and at times even its own cast. Jennifer Tilly plays an exaggerated version of herself, adding a unique layer to the meta-humor. She deals with Hollywood pressures, and at one point, Tiffany, who is now a huge fan of Tilly, tries to possess her body to fulfill her fantasy of living as a Hollywood starlet. The film continuously blurs the line between reality and fiction, breaking the fourth wall in ways that were uncommon for horror movies at the time. This layer of self-parody might feel like a stretch, but for fans who appreciated Bride of Chucky's humor, it worked as a bold and hilarious expansion. We see Chucky questioning his own purpose, doubting his role as a father, while simultaneously trying to teach Glenn/Glenda the ropes of killing. This almost humanizes Chucky in a very strange way, adding a bizarre but entertaining twist to his character. And for fans who enjoy dark humor, seeing Chucky navigate fatherhood, albeit in his own brutal way, adds another strange charm to his character. Now the problem was, this movie received mixed reactions from not only fans but critics as well. While some appreciated the film's daring approach and heavy use of satire, others felt that it was far too away from its horror roots that made Chucky terrifying in the first place. In many ways, it was a movie that was ahead of its time, exploring complex themes like identity and family dynamics that would only later gain mainstream discussion. However, because the film leaned so hard into its campiness, it lost some of the core horror audience that has supported the franchise from the beginning. For the franchise itself, Seed of Chucky represented a creative risk, one that pushed boundaries and set the stage for the next evolution of the franchise. After testing the waters with this movie, the franchise would eventually pivot back towards horror with Curse of Chucky in 2013. But Seed of Chucky holds a unique place in the series for fans who enjoy the horror comedy extremes of Chucky's character and appreciate the bizarre, satirical lens that Don Mancini applied to the genre. In the end, Seed cemented Chucky as a character that could be more than just a generic slasher villain. It expanded his personality, challenged genre norms, and showed audiences that horror could get campy, funny, and still retain a dark edge. For better or worse, Seed of Chucky is a bold experiment and cemented Chucky's place in horror as a character unafraid to evolve, experiment, and push the genre's boundaries. So the next installment then, Curse of Chucky, was a way to kind of reconnect Chucky with his slasher roots. And the shift worked pretty well. The film embraced a chilling atmosphere reminiscent of the 80s horror that Chucky fans loved, re-establishing him as a creepy and menacing villain. The setting alone marked a return to form. Most of Curse of Chucky takes place in a single secluded house, a classic horror setup that brings the suspense back to basics. This isolated environment harkens back to classic slasher films, creating a claustrophobic feel that intensifies the scares. Now, Fiona Dourif, the daughter of Brad Dourif, who voices Chucky, took up the lead character of Nika Pierce. She's introduced as a protagonist who's paralysed from the waist down, adding a layer of vulnerability and suspense as she navigates a house with a killer doll on the loose. The setup, combined with limited characters and dark cinematography, effectively channels that tense horror atmosphere that defined Child's Play. In Curse of Chucky, Chucky is also back to his brutal self, with the wisecracks toned down and his focus on pure terror restored. His personality is darker and more sinister, with less comedic banter and more psychological torment. Chucky's kills in this movie are brutal and pretty straightforward, leaning more towards suspense and terror than the spectacle and satire of previous films. His character feels more menacing as he stalks Nika and her family. We also see flashes of the Charles Lee Ray persona that bring out this truly sadistic nature. Now, the movie wasn't just a return to horror, but a return to Chucky's origins. In a clever twist, the film explores connections to the original Child's Play, revealing Chucky's persona's vendetta against this family. We get deeper insight into Charles Lee Ray's backstory, adding new context to his motivations and enhancing the continuity of the franchise. The backstory is especially important for longtime fans, as it gives the original Child's Play mythology greater depth, making Chucky's actions feel more purposeful. Now, both fans and critics responded far more positively to The Curse of Chucky, appreciating the return to a simpler horror format. Many praised the film's atmosphere and suspenseful pacing, as well as the balance it struck between honouring Chucky's roots and evolving his character. By regrounding the character in horror, Mancini revitalised the franchise and showed that Chucky could still be terrifying when stripped of his comedic excessiveness. In many ways, it was this movie that proved that Chucky wasn't really tied to any specific genre. He wasn't a horror character, and he wasn't a comedy character. He could be both, one or the other, or neither. He was a character that could just adopt current horror trends and still remain relevant. It bridged the gap between Chucky's horror origins and the dark humour that he'd acquired over the years, setting the stage for the series to continue evolving while paying tribute to what made Chucky such a compelling character from the start. So, following the success of Curse, the franchise moved on with The Cult of Chucky in 2017, and this took the franchise to a new, ambitious direction yet again, expanding the mythology and the lore of the franchise. In this installment, Chucky gains the ability to possess multiple dolls, and even people, simultaneously, allowing him to become a near unstoppable force. By reinventing his possession powers, Cult of Chucky raised the stakes, adding fresh terror while exploring themes of identity, control, and legacy in the horror genre. So thanks to a voodoo chant that he discovers online, Chucky is no longer confined to a single doll, making him more powerful and terrifying than ever. This new possession twist adds an unsettling layer of unpredictability, as we see Chucky inhabiting multiple dolls simultaneously, essentially creating his own twisted army. He even possesses people, taking control of Fiona Dourif, which brings a haunting new aspect to his character and raises psychological questions about identity and autonomy. This concept of multiple Chuckies isn't just a plot device, it allows the franchise to examine ideas of fragmentation and control in a chillingly fresh way. The notion of Chucky multiplying introduces the terrifying idea that his evil can spread, making him nearly impossible to defeat. For longtime fans, it felt like an innovative evolution of his character. He's no longer just one doll, but potentially a whole movement of destruction. There's also a much more psychological angle to this movie, creating an environment where reality and horror blur. Set in a mental institution really added to that. Chucky's sadism is also fully unleashed, and his personality shines through each of the dolls he possesses, each one carrying a slightly different tone or facial expression. This approach creates a twisted funhouse effect, where we see Chucky's character fragment into different versions, showing just how unhinged and sadistic he's become. We also had the return of franchise favourites like Andy Barclay, the original protagonist of Child's Play, which serves as a bit of a callback for fans and connects the new storyline to the original lore. By reintroducing Andy and referencing older characters, the film manages to honour the franchise's history while pushing the story into new territory. Andy's involvement adds an intriguing layer of fan service and continuity, as he's now an adult who has been forever scarred by his childhood experiences. His interactions with Chucky are loaded with history, giving their scenes a tense, emotional undertone that resonates with longtime fans of the series. Seeing Andy face Chucky in new, brutal confrontations adds depth to the character dynamics and lets fans feel the weight of their shared past. This movie was again well received by fans who appreciated the inventive new direction, as well as its horror meets psychological thriller approach. The film reinforced Chucky's adaptability once more, showing he could remain terrifying even with the addition of almost supernatural lore. By expanding his powers, Mancini created fresh possibilities for Chucky's story, laying the groundwork for the 2021 Chucky TV series and ensuring the franchise could continue evolving with its audiences. So, let's talk a little bit about the Chucky TV series. So after decades of slashing through things and people on the big screen, Chucky made his way to television in 2021 with the Chucky TV series, and this transition allowed for a fresh layered approach to the killer doll. The show brought Chucky to a new generation while paying homage to the classic films, creating a blend of horror, dark humour and character development that allowed for deeper storytelling than just a single movie's runtime would typically allow. One of the biggest advantages of moving to television was the opportunity for long-form storytelling, which let the series dive deeper into Chucky's character, backstory and connections with past characters. Unlike the films, which often had to rush plotlines or lean heavily into horror comedy, the show uses episodic structure to expand Chucky's relationship with new and returning characters alike. In this format, Chucky could reintroduce themes of terror and suspense, while building intricate story arcs that explore both new horror and darkly comedic angles. Chucky's interactions with a younger, modern cast of characters give him fresh opportunities to wreak havoc in ways that feel both nostalgic and new. We follow Jake Wheeler, a high school student who finds himself entangled with Chucky after purchasing him at a yard sale. Through Jake's struggles with bullying, trauma, and self-discovery, Chucky addresses deeper, more contemporary themes that ground the horror in real-life issues. This approach allows the show to appeal to a younger audience, drawing parallels between Chucky's chaotic influence and the turmoil of growing up, all while weaving in traditional horror elements. It also explores themes like bullying, identity, and acceptance, both literal and metaphorically. Jake's journey through high school and his struggles as a gay teenager are integral to the series' plot, adding emotional weight to the horror. Chucky, in his usual twisted way, manipulates these vulnerabilities, creating a haunting yet oddly relatable dynamic with the young protagonist. By adding this layer, the show brings new depth to Chucky's character once again as he steps into the role of an anti-hero, twisted and terrifying, but also oddly reflective of his victims' darkest feelings. In addition, the series dives into the concept of legacy, touching on how trauma can be passed down, whether through family history or, in this case, through the horror Chucky inflicts across generations. This multi-generational horror gives Chucky an enduring relevance that few horror icons can achieve, as the show balances the familiar slasher thrills with emotional and psychological themes that speak to today's viewers. The series doesn't forget its roots either. It's packed with Easter eggs, callbacks, and returning characters that honour longtime fans. By reintroducing characters like Andy Barclay, Kyle, and Tiffany Valentine, the show adds depth to the franchise, showing how these figures have been shaped by their past encounters with Chucky. The presence of these classic characters gives fans a sense of continuity while bridging Chucky's early years with modern storylines, making the show feel like a direct extension of the films rather than a reboot. Jennifer Tilly reprises her role as Tiffany, bringing back the wicked humour and chemistry she shares with Chucky, while also allowing for new plotlines that play with both her character's legacy and the horror comedy dynamic she introduced in The Bride of Chucky. Andy, as the franchise's original protagonist, brings a nostalgic yet tragic element as he continues to hunt Chucky, still haunted by his childhood trauma. These familiar faces add emotional weight and bring a sense of closure to long-running storylines while introducing them to a new generation of fans. The TV series was met with pretty positive reviews, both fans and critics appreciating that blend of horror, humour and heart, something that each installment in the movie franchise kind of did well. Even if each of them individually did lean heavier into one or the other, the show manages to blend them all. It addresses modern issues while staying true to the roots of the franchise. The show has successfully drawn in new fans without alienating longtime followers. Ultimately, once again, the series proved that the franchise can adapt and thrive across multiple mediums, staying relevant while honouring its horror legacy. It's a testament to Chucky's versatility as a character and to Don Mancini's willingness to reinvent a killer doll for new generations without sacrificing what made him iconic. Through TV, Chucky has cemented his place not only as a slasher villain, but a horror icon, one who can continue to grow, adapt, and terrify, one generation at a time. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into Chucky's evolution, let's talk about what makes him one of horror's most beloved icons. For more than 3 decades now, Chucky has managed to capture the imagination of audiences in ways that few horror villains ever have been able to. But what makes a 2-foot-tall, wisecracking doll stand out from the likes of Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and Jason Voorhees? I think the answer is simple, and if you haven't gathered it yet from this entire video, then shame on you. The answer is adaptability. Over the years, he's transformed from a slasher villain to a comedic anti-hero and then back again, going from movies to TV, just showing incredible flexibility for a horror character. Unlike many icons who rely on a single unchanging persona, Chucky has evolved with the times, shifting from pure horror to horror comedy, psychological thriller and more. This willingness to explore new genres and tones keeps him fresh and feeling relevant. No matter what trends in the horror genre are currently in vogue, Chucky has a place in it. It's also the fact that Chucky's impact extends beyond just horror movies and horror TV shows. Over the years, he's become a pop culture icon, referenced in tons of other movies. There's been parodies, TV shows, all types of media, action figures, merchandise, memes, you name it, there's probably something with Chucky on it. He's left a huge mark on pop culture. His recognizable appearance, coupled with his catchphrases and unhinged personality, make him instantly identifiable and pretty memorable. I think there's also the fact that he is so long-standing has helped fans feel connected to him, because people, especially around my sort of age, essentially grew up with Chucky, and that gives us a connection to him as a character. He had a movie around when I was born, there was movies coming out as I was growing up, and even now as an adult of an unnamed age, I still get to enjoy content based around Chucky. It's a shame that the TV series is no more, but I'm sure it's not the end of the character. I'm sure we'll be getting some more. But in the end, Chucky's lasting legacy is about more than just scares or laughs. It's about evolution that keeps fans engaged. Whether you're a Chucky fan for the horror and his slasher roots, or whether you love him for the comedy, he remains an icon because he changes with the times, all while staying true to his terrifying, twisted self. And that's what makes him a character who will likely keep shocking, scaring, and amusing audiences for years to come. Thank you all so much for joining me today for this deep dive into what made Chucky such an icon. He's personally one of my favourite horror characters, and the Child's Play / Chucky franchise is one of my favourite franchises in horror. I don't have enough Chucky merch. A t-shirt, a couple of t-shirts, a doll, a NECA figure, but I need more. I need more. These shelves still have some spaces on, so got to get me some more Chucky good stuff. Right, that sounded weird.
So beautiful.
Anyway, again, I really hope you all enjoyed. Please consider liking and subscribing to Dead Scared if you want more content like this. These deep dives, they take a lot of research, a lot of time to edit, so hopefully it was worth it and you guys have enjoyed. Hope you all have a great day, and I will see you next time on Dead Scared.